DocuLabs Live on LinkedIn. My name is Rick Tucker, and I am your introducer for the day. I'd like to welcome you all, whether you're in our Zoom studio or whether you're live on LinkedIn. We are recording today's session for posterity, and we'll be taking questions throughout. So logistics, if you're in Zoom, you can Zoom chat me. If you're in LinkedIn, you could put a comment or a question in the LinkedIn chat, in the LinkedIn comments. Or if you want to just email a private question, you can email me, rtucker, R-T-U-C-K-E-R @doculabs.com. For today's session, we have Richard Medina discussing preparations for phase 3 of intelligent document processing. He's going to lead our training today and give you some good nuggets and ideas for how your organization can get ready and be prepared for the next waves of intelligent document processing. Richard, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Rick, and hello, everyone. So in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to address these questions. First, what is IDP and what must you know about it if you're going to pursue it? This will be valuable information. I know you've probably sat through or read some a lot of information on IDP, and I'm not going to go over the same material. This will be new. Who is the IDP customer? That is, it's kind of complex. There are many customers within your organizations. IT is a customer. Operations, if they facilitate scanning and ingestion, they're a customer. The lines of business and shared services like HR, they're a customer. And then you've got maybe B2B customers and then ultimate end user customers. There's a lot of customers, and you can build a business case for each one. And so I'm going to show you how to do that, which is by step 4. And then we'll talk about next steps. First, Rick, you be my heckler. How am I doing so far? Can you hear me?
Clear as a bell, Richard. You're doing great. Thank you.
Okay. So we need a problem statement. So what is the problem we're trying to solve? The problem we're trying to solve is most document processes are still a mess. This is a modification of a slide I did for a client way back in the aughts when they were just beginning to do printers that could also scan, and they were facilitating that as well as centralized capture and so on. And not a lot has changed. Basically, the way to read this is the nice right arrows that are gray. That's the way that process is moving forward, and the red squiggly ones is all the rework, exception handling, error tracking, and so on that gets done. So capture processes, ingestion is still a mess. Processes are still too manual. Even if you have a good capture center, typically it's downstream. The lines of business still have claims people or loan people who are still doing data entry and so on, because the capture center didn't do all the relevant extraction and so on. So let's fix that, make it automated and so on, but there's more. So many of you folks, if you're on the demand side, if you're end user folks like banks and so on, you're probably, the average is that you're unhappy with your current capture solutions. They're too expensive, they're way too burdened by technical debt, old code and modules and so on. They're too inflexible and so on. Second issue is that many of your lines of business want to introduce automation, which is great, but also they're doing it. That is, they're using RPAs to introduce some IDP, or they're using specialized vertical applications that address contracts, but also have some OCR or data extraction. And so this is a big trend. So Dan Lucarini from Deep Analysis, he's an IDP analyst, and he tracks over 300 IDP vendors, most of which are business system or application vendors who saw that they needed automation for extracting information, and so put in or built or OEM a little OCR engine or an AI-based extraction engine or whatever. So those are going to proliferate. You got to put your foot down, do some standards or whatever, so it's not a big mess. Third, in this, beyond just data, improving efficiency in data capture is downstream content services and workflow process management is ready to use the data that you can extract, and to tag information for document classification, tagging, extraction, and so on, for automation, for compliance, and so on. And then finally, kind of from left field in 2023, is Gen AI is very hot, right? Large language models. And organizations, every single one that we know of, is looking at Gen AI in some way. And IDP is an outstanding quick win for Gen AI POC pilot, or put it into production, because it's something old and something new. By something old, I mean it consists of some mature, solid ground that you can start working with. It's very measurable to see what ROI you're getting, and so on. So that's why IDP is hot. And so here's the solution. Here's IDP. It consists of roughly 11 modules. It applies artificial intelligence and machine learning to the processing of documents and extracting the relevant information from them. You folks know the old way we used to do ingestion and so on. First, you do capture, and then you do some pre-processing. That's image cleanup. Then by hand, you classify the documents, index them, or extract some relevant information, put it through QA, who would try to detect and correct errors, and be thrown over the fence to downstream content systems or business systems. There'd be humans involved. There'd be some workflow to orchestrate the step by step by step, and there'd be some good administration and reporting. So what's changed? What's changed? All of those have changed, but the core of what's changed is the core. That's that second group. So using AI and machine learning for classification, extraction, validation, and conversion. You can think of that as, particularly in the last year or so, with the advance of large language models as the engine of this race car we're building. But you also need the car that has to keep up. The car has to be built around it. So we're seeing advances in not so much ingestion, but in pre-processing. So what many of the vendors do is to do some full text, maybe even stupid OCR, some 1990 style OCR, full text on the documents, to help with the hardcore automated classification and extraction. You also have human in the loop. So the human assistance is different than it was in the old days. So as you do exceptions or error or do QA, it's also retraining the system, so it'll be smarter next time. And absolutely essential is this process management or workflow or orchestration backbone that sticks all the pieces together, including the task automation or RPA. That is, a lot of the tasks that get done could be done by RPA. So you try to create, for example, you try to, if not prevent, then detect and correct errors as early in the process as possible. So as you start getting documents from submitters, you say, ooh, this is missing a signature, this is missing page 4, and so on. And you send a notification via RPA to the submitter, who might still be at the scanner or the phone, and they can then correct it. Okay, so this is IDP, consists of both the engine and also the car. No one does all of this really well. The engine vendors, like the hyperscalers, like AWS and Microsoft, they're good at the engine, not so good at the car. There are car vendors out there who are very good at that, but are still have to develop or OEM the engines. Okay. Want to say one more thing about this. It is exploding, and we often talk about phases. So Dan Wiccarini, I'm going to reference him again, talks about 4 phases of capture. Basically, OCR in the 1960s, then the era of forms and templates in the 80s and 90s, and then the AI eras with machine learning, and then most recently the large language models. Well, that's a good start, but here's where it gets interesting. Everything that's interesting about IDP happened with AI, particularly in the last year or so. And there are multiple generations of AI. And so one of the things that we've learned in the last year and a half or so is that you should, if you're a customer, and you must, if you are a vendor, ask, where are we in this evolution of AI models? Are we still with the old ones, template matching and feature extraction, which means you're dead in the water? Or are you on the road to using, support vector machines, CNN, RNN, and even moving to large multimodal transformer models? The idea being, just as an example, you don't just recognize a document by what it looks like, by the text, but also the picture of it. And you can use an image and use both to help classify the documents and so on. So revolutionary stuff. Your vendor must be on the road to have a plan to be able to insert those if they don't have them now. The second trend, I would say, after this is it's been a rhythm of innovation and combination. That is, since about 2016, 2017, when this stuff really started taking off, what we've seen is there's been a real jump in the core IDP engines, and then they've taken advantage of that in the next 3 years or so by combining it with other pieces. So in English, in 2016, 2017, we saw a real advance in the engines and methods with Hyperscience and some other vendors. And then in 2020 or so, then what you had to do was combine IDP with RPA and put it into an orchestration backbone, and thereby reap the benefits of real intelligent process automation. Now right now we're in the stage towards the end of 2023 of where we souped up the engine again, and now what we're going to be doing is souping up the car, combining it with other pieces, and really being able to do a good job of human in the loop and process automation, and combining it with RPA, as well as even downstream into the lines of business to help with the actual tasks that humans do in the lines of business, like adjudicate loans or do claims processing or whatever. What I want to do now is actually talk about IDP in the wild, and give you some examples of IDP, the capabilities they have and vendors have, and how they flow out. I'm not going to evaluate vendors, but I just want to show you, because we find that rather than me giving you flow charts and so on, let's look at some real ones, and that'll help you faster be able to analyze when you're seeing these from the vendor presentations and so on, and you know what questions to ask. So for example, here's a really simple one from Effisoft, and you can see all the pieces that I talked about. You can see ingestion and image processing, which includes, if you can read the text, that they do dumb full text OCR to help with classification extraction, which they do. And then they do completely human validation. So there's no automation there. And then they throw it over the fence. So that's really straightforward, very simple. It gets a little more complicated with IBM. Many of you, if you're in financial services or insurance, are IBM customers. So these are the questions to ask. I'm going to do this very quickly. You can see this, for example, you can see this flow. I hope you can see my cursor. But 90% of it just has to do with capture or dumping it into a bucket. But the core, the actual IDP piece that's of interest is in this area, roughly 8, 9, and so on. And so, oops, the question to ask here is, so we have 3 modules: data, document recognition, classification, extraction, and validation. Okay, that's great. What are the engines used? What's productized versus coming from partners? What's magical special sauce, which is a one-off just for me? What commits me to a completely separate code base and product lifecycle? So for example, if it uses something like Watson or whatever, does that commit me to now I'm the hair on the tail of the dog? So that's the kind of question. Diagrams should start prompting questions to help you unpack them. And then let's do another one, which is AWS. So this is a hyperscaler, a cloud vendor along with Google and Microsoft, who are some of the leaders in doing the engines. And this is a little bit difficult to decode, but I'll do it. So you've got capture here, and then you've got the pre-OCR that I was talking about, the pre-processing, and then you've got document classification over here on the right-hand side. If this is the face of a clock, it would be at the 2 o'clock position. And then down here you have extraction. They have something called enrichment. So that's good. So you're not just pulling info from the text, but you're also determining submitter's intent, but also you're doing additional relationships and tagging of the docs and data. And then over here is validation, but it's human validation. Okay. So the questions that this should bring to mind is, that's great. I see great engines here, but where's the car? Is it a one-off kit car done in a garage, or is it a very expensive car from Romania, or what? Who makes the car? Is it productized, and so on? So that leads me to the questions. I'm going to crystallize some of the questions that you should be asking of yourself. Of your vendors if you're a customer, and of yourselves if you're a vendor. So these are just from, these are the top questions, the top capabilities that you acquire for IDP in our opinion. So the first is, so Mr. and Ms. Vendor, are you competitive on IDP? That is, do you have the engines that can do this stuff that I talked about? Or do you have a roadmap that's either going to develop them or going to OEM or partner with someone who can provide them so that you will be competitive in the next few years? Now, obviously, if you just have simple IDP requirements, this may not be an issue. But if you're doing anything significant, this may be an issue. That's question number one. Number two is, if innovation is the engine, completeness is the car. Okay, so do you provide everything else we need for IDP? So as you saw from this AWS graphic that I showed, you got to capture documents. So what am I doing with that? Do you provide it? Do I keep my legacy capture vendor, or do I buy something else? What about workflow and orchestration, especially human in the loop? So human in the loop workflow is very different than old-timey 1990s human in the loop, where you're doing a lot of data entry and so on. It requires, for example, retraining the system. So do you provide that? Administration and reporting. Okay. Third is productization. So this is basically, of the 300 plus vendors that Declan Lucarini tracks, how many are for real? How many can you actually can productize what they have, put it to market, sell it, deliver it, and support these capabilities? So to use the car model with gas stations or fuel stations if it's electric, and part suppliers, and also ready mechanics who are skilled in servicing your beast. This is a huge deal for IDP, particularly since there are hundreds of these specialized vertical vendors who are not going to be adept at putting in the big engines and so on, and not going to be able to compete with the big IDP vendors. Fourth is about you, if you're a consumer. Look at yourselves. Are you can you consume it and produce and be productive? What I mean by that is, can you use the IDP vendor? So imagine you're an old-timey OCR using, capture using organization, and suddenly you get hit with the AWS model for how to do it. Huge differences in the methods and skills and so on. Is it going to be a drastic change, or can you actually jump off the dock and onto the boat and be able to put it into production and sustain the capabilities with sufficient ROI? So a big issue, a big car issue, is that many of the folks who have great engines and even they partner with folks like Accenture and others who do the car, they're still focused. They know about knowledge processes, knowledge worker processes, but they don't know much about factory type process workers and so on. And we all know, right? If you're pushing 40 documents, 40 million pages per year in a production system, there's certain things you got to do in your workflow to make it easier for humans where they're involved. Reduce eye movement, reduce finger fatigue. You don't use a mouse, you're doing fast keys, quick keys, and so on. It's that sort of thing, which is new to many of them, will kill you if you're high production, high scale versus low scale. So that's something to really look into. And then the final one is precision, the precision problem. And that is the main problem of LLM and some of the fancy new large language models, is that they are, they're very confident de-essers. So they give wrong answers with great confidence. And so that's an issue, particularly if you've got applications, use cases which are regulated or doing money and require very few, if any, wrong answers. So it means that even if you put them into place, you're going to have to spend a lot doing QA, error detection and error correction and so on. So it may not be worth it in the near term. But they are improving, and you should be asking your vendor, what are you doing about the precision problem? And so on. Okay, so am I doing okay, Rick?
You're doing great, Richard. Keep going.
So these are the questions you should be asking and so on. And vendors, you should be asking these of yourselves and improving. And so who is the IDP customer? I think I overcomplicated this. This is a reference model that we use for banks. But it's basically, there's lots of customers that can use IDP, lots of folks. But we can simplify it and say, two kinds of folks in this world. This business, the business, and there's shared services, the business, let's say retail banking, but it could also be, dog food manufacturing or whatever. And then within shared services, you've got some of the departments like HR and accounting who use a lot of documents. And then you've got the supply side, let's say, and you've got IT as a shared service and say document capture operations, or at least operations. Okay. And all of these are customers. So I'm going to say, I'd say IT first, right? They're the ones who have to live with and deal with and develop the solutions from the IDP. And then you've got the capture operations center who use the software and have to scan 40 million pages per year, whatever it is. It might be a departmental little operations center. Then you've got the lines of business who actually use the images, use the information, and so on. And a good way to think of this, Rick, were you going to ask me a question?
Rich, we got a question about what are the suppliers doing to solve those problems for those organizations? Are they still selling mostly to the line of the IT organization, or are they starting to branch out? And is there any reason to reach out to the line of business?
It's a hodgepodge, right? So a lot of them just do departmental, and so the 300 vendors that we were talking about, they're hitting the departmental folks rather than IT typically, certainly not the operations center. But you have some of the strategic vendors in IDP that are hitting the operations center and IT, which is really interesting. I want to say that this is a little complicated. I've been talking about 300 vendors, but real quick, I just want to mention the kinds of vendors that there are that you will be looking at. And we can divide them into, good Lord, 7. So first are the capture platforms. So the ones that if you're large, you probably have. So, Kofax and OpenText Captiva and IBM and so on. And then there are the IDP suites. So these are folks who typically do all of IDP, except for they don't drive scanners. And so these might be folks like Hyperscience and so on. Abby does both, and TCG Process. Abby does actually drive scanners as well. So they could go in category 1. Then there are the ECM suites like Highland and obviously, and say IBM and others who do Laserfish, who do they do IDP and capture as well as ECM. Then you have the automation suites and platforms. So these are the RPA vendors who have diversified, and the process automation platforms or workflow vendors who have done it as well. And then fifth, you got what we call the Legos vendors, and they might be little toolkit vendors and so on, but typically it's dominated now by the cloud vendors, the hyperscalers, AWS and Microsoft and Google. And then you have the vertical folks. So the folks who have a contract management application and they put in OCR and now IDP, or they have invoices for supply chain, and now they've provided it. And so it's a vertical or specialized application that's ID capabilities. And the last one are the BPOs, the service providers, the capture vendors, the folks who might be general like Conduit, or might be specific like Transflow and TriumphPay for the shipping, trucking, logistics area. So there's a lot of baskets of fruit, apples and grapes and bowling balls and so on that you have to sort through. Let us know if you need any help with that. But here's the business case for the various customer types, and they are very different. If you're going after IT, then IT you are very interested in, and so the vendor should be interested in selling you that you can really shorten the development cycle and reduce the development cost of building new models, of adding new form types, of adding new workflows, and so on. That's been a real challenge with many of the capture and IDP vendors, even if they tout themselves as being low code, no code. Secondly, the whole point of this presentation, achieve high levels of accuracy and automation. Accuracy is that you get the answers right. Automation is that you can do that answers right and few answers wrong. Automation is that you can do that not just for 5% of the fields on forms, but 99%. Maybe everything gets to be straight through processing and so on. So it's the completeness of your accuracy. And then address change in new docs. So this is an emerging issue, which folks often don't realize until they get deep into this, is that you often have you have many doc types. You might call them templates, or they're just doc types. And constantly they're changing, either because old ones from the 90s are getting submitted and now are into the flow, or maybe you white label them and some of your B2B customers white label them, but you're still providing, or your partners, you're getting them back. For any reason, there's changing varieties of forms and documents, and you can't choke on them and you can't spend time manually retraining the system on them. So the system should be able to say, this is a variant of this one, I got it, and be able to go through. So that's IT, make IT happy. For capture operations, it's reduce technology costs. That's what folks have been doing for the last 15 years. And that has been traditionally moving from multiple platforms and systems and suites and so on down to just a few. Oftentimes it's been the capture platforms. Sometimes it's been other ones that have traditionally, that grew up with IDP. So standardize and consolidate solutions, reduce your labor costs by removing people hours, take on more work streams and volume without adding resources, and make customers happy. A bit of demographics. I know we're challenged with time now, Rick, but I'm going to continue. A big demographic issue is that with most of our clients, we found that during the time of COVID, if they had capture operation centers, the capture operation centers would kind of hunker down and just stick to their knitting, and the lines of business would be separate, and so they grew distant from each other. And the lines of business got a worse view of what the capture operation center was doing. So post-COVID, what we saw is capture operation center emerging from the ground and trying to re-engage with the customers and do better by way of SLAs, be more transparent, be more efficient, but then also some of them, not all of them, forging the way ahead and moving and digitally transforming, and not just riding the declining volumes of paper down into the sunset. Okay, so that's capture operations. Final one is line of business. I'm going to take one at loan out origination. So this is where you meet the business where what they're interested in. Sure, you can talk about reducing paper inefficiencies and keeping them from. So you've got claims people and you've got loan adjusters and so on. So you hired them to do that, and now they're doing data entry, or they're doing QA on these documents which came in. Well, you can fix that with automation and so on. That's part of the way to sell it internally. But another way is to actually understand what the KPIs are and the business objectives are for each of the business departments, and then hit them that way. So if you take loan origination, obviously they're interested in productivity, overall productivity, various measures of that. Pull-through rate is, batting average. Abandoned loan rate is when the customer fires the bank. Even though they get the loan, they say, nah, I don't like you. And so they say, no, I'm going to go with someone else. And then application approval rate is how little false positives did you address? That is, how few people did you get who you fired, who the bank fired? That is, they took them through it's a false positive. You take them through most of the process, and then you realize that there's an issue way downstream. So you wasted all this time and so on. So if you can improve those, that'd be great. So how do you do that? Keep it simple, reduce cycle time in the various stages of loan origination, applying, approving, closing, and funding. How do you do that? By addressing NIGOs, not in good order, by removing work steps that have to do with rework, reducing data entry, the manual stuff, reducing QA steps, and other steps like the customer calling in, where's my loan, and so on. So how do you do that? Again, that's by introducing IDP, which reduces errors and NIGOs and so on, reduces labor, thereby reducing cycle time, thereby improving pull-through rate and such. So let's look at the business case where there are some actual numbers. I'll wait for the slide to catch up.
You're good, Rich. I can see it.
Okay, good. So
you need a breath, though? Take a breath, buddy. You're doing a great job.
So the number one metric that you should be looking at is throughput. So how many seconds, this is where you start. How many seconds per document, or minutes if you've got problems, or how many documents per hour, which is just the reversal of the numerator and denominator. And so you get that, and so you might move from 50, today you might be doing 50 seconds per page. And with automation, you can get 10 seconds per page. 80% improvement, which translates to today you're doing 70 documents per hour with your manual processes. You can improve that to 330 documents per hour. Again, 80% improvement. And that's great. And you get that through improving accuracy in the automation, making IT happy. But that also feeds labor in operations and in the downstream line of business, reduces cycle time, and so on. So that's the fundamental way to do it, to look at, and you can get it in your log. If your capture system's any good, you can see how many seconds per document you add up, how many through the various steps, how long it's taking. And then you apply that to, next step is that you apply it to labor, to how many people you're using and their cost per hour and so on. So what I did here is this is based on an actual client of ours, but all the numbers have been adjusted and so on and messed with and such. But it has the flavor of reality. So you feed into a business case calculating labor costs and savings, and thus overall automation savings. And this will work for an operations center or a line of business. Would thank IT for giving them the awesome software. And you can see where you have 4 lines of business and the number of images that they, and thus documents per year that they're shooting, images per year, and that's the cost for per document, and how much it costs for doing classification and basic minimal document tagging and validation versus, and also more complex. We're doing 20 fields from these documents and pulling the address and all that stuff off, and the cost for each of that, about $1.80 per document. And then if you can get, here are some steps that you can take to automate. So you might be just automating the easy documents for lines of business, or you might just be doing a few fields, the easy fields, or you might just be doing a few lines of business. But these are reasonable steps. Whether you automate 25%, 65%, and with IDP you can get better, 80% and 90%. If you're interested in this, let us know so we can give you the template for how to do this kind of business case and so on, and get you rolling. So this is my final slide, content slide really, and that is, okay, you're interested in this stuff. So what are my next steps? Well, let's identify, do a current state and understand what your requirements are for capture and IDP and so on. And the nuance is that some of the requirements and capabilities you have are provided by the scanner drivers, the scanner vendors, and the capture vendors, like running scanners. Some of them are provided just by pure IDP vendors. Some of them are provided by basically anyone who dips a toe into the IDP field. But certainly the capture vendors and the pure IDP vendors provide a lot of this. So you're looking at different categories of those 7 types of vendors that I talked about, and you're trying to determine what can I keep from what I have today, and which should I jettison, and how should I do the division of labor. Now, all of these requirements here, these are all functional, and we've written these up into a requirements document that explains what each of them are. And so you can just, by subtraction, it's a superset, you can figure out what you need. We also have technical requirements as well, so the geeky stuff that supports this, and that might help you as well. So with respect to this wrap up, I hope I explained what IDP is and what you must know about it. Those 5 questions that weren't in your grandfather's capture investment. Who is the customer? Have some subtlety with the different kinds of customers that there are. How do you create a business case? Understand that they have different needs, and there's different ways that you're hitting, whether it's just pure labor cost in the capture center versus, or software development costs versus reducing cycle time for a particular process within a particular line of business. And then next steps. If you direct out of this one, if you want the requirements document, just let me know. If you want the template for doing the business case, let me know. And we can certainly, commercial here, we can certainly help you with doing any of this, understand your own gaps, defining what capabilities you need, actually building the business case, comparing you to your peers. We've done benchmarks with capture operations since the mid-1990s, both on the demand side. So you folks, if you are capture folks, if you are businesses, and also on the supply side, so the BPOs who try to do that for most of those customers. and then help you with usher you through selecting vendors, doing RFPs or POCs or pilots into production. Back to you, Rick.
Well, Richard, thank you very much. That was fantastic. A lot of content in a little period of time. So as Richard mentioned, if you do want to talk more about this, reach out to Richard, reach out to me. We'd be happy to set up a meeting and have a phone call with you. If you want to learn more about what we're talking about and the things, continue to follow us on LinkedIn. And our next LinkedIn Live event is November 16th, where Richard and Marty Pavlik are going to talk about 5 things you need to know about generative AI. It's a big part of the continuing evolution of technology capabilities within the AI marketplace, as well as the content marketplace. So we thank you for your time. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll talk to you next time.